It is the close of the 19th century. In the Antarctic, a strange new substance was discovered. Called Sturginium by its finders, this high-energy power source promised a better and brighter future for all of mankind. However, those who had been so foolishly given the reins of power had different ideas. And so, warfare was changed forever. Sturginium had promised a future utopia, but instead, in the darkness of the 19th century, there is only... It was a cold day in the North Atlantic when they were spotted moving south from Greenland, the Prussian Imperium trying to smuggle their latest superweapon across the sea in order to wreak havoc across North America. Opposing them is a hastily cobbled-together fleet of the Canadian Naval Defense Force. These brave souls are all that stands between North America and Imperial domination, and with the limited resources available to them, they can only hope and pray that this Imperial force has overextended itself. The air will fill with the black smoke of war in these Sturginium Skies. And here it is, the Sturginium Skies 2-player starter set for Dystopian Wars. This is the newest version of the starter set, but it's a game that's actually been around for about a decade. Similar to Drop Zone Commander, it actually has quite a bit of history to it. It's what I call a back burner game, similar to the stuff made by Privateer Press or Drop Zone Commander or a whole variety of other games that aren't, this. But, it is originally a naval game, but it's actually a mixture of both sea and air that makes this thing a pretty interesting thing to do. Now, I've seen combinations of like air and ground, sort of like Drop Zone Commander, but this one plays out a bit differently. It's actually designed to simulate a naval battle, and not like Battleship where you're just kind of shooting blindly at an invisible screen. No, there's actually not only strategy involved, but a lot of interesting mechanics such as with momentum and a variety of other things that make movement in it a lot trickier than a typical game. So this is actually a pretty impressively heavy box, and it has a lot of things inside of it. It has a Prussian Imperium army and an army for the Crown, which is basically England, although in this case it's actually a Canadian fleet, as they are attempting to stop the Prussian Imperium from bringing this big boy over to North America to cause trouble. So you can tell it's a very fictionalized idea of sort of World War I era, as dirigibles are actually viable weapons in this game, so complete and utter work of fiction. So it comes with everything you need. It has the rules, it has the campaign books. A lot of people actually don't know that games like Warhammer actually have like campaign settings that have special rules for how to play a game, how special setups for armies and objectives and all of that. So this actually comes with a campaign that these people can play across. It's not just a basic game of people set two armies on either side and then they just march at each other and hit each other. No, there's objectives, there's secret objectives, there's ways to do that, ways to earn points. It's frequently not the last man standing for these kinds of fights. It's just as often whichever player maneuvers best and manages to get a lot of stats on. So got a lot of stuff in here. We of course have these two large fleets up here. We have measuring tools. It used to be that the ships had different measuring tools, different curve tools for how they move, but now all ships use the same curve tool, but each ship now has a different number of turns depending on how small they are. So the smaller boats can make more turns on their move action. We have a ruler. This whole thing is actually on a sprue. It's something you put together yourself, similar to how Kill Team does it. So that's going to be pretty interesting. We have unique attack dice. This used to be a D6 game, but now they have special dice for the game. And these, I believe, are actually molded dice, which is pretty nice. It means that even if the paint gets damaged, you can still tell what each of these symbols mean. We have a couple of card decks that can give you victory objectives or little bonuses on your turn. They're double-sided and can be used for either, which is pretty neat. And yep, that's about what we got. So let's get this thing open. All right, let's have a closer look at what is inside this box. Now this is, it's by War Cradle Studios. I forgot to mention that. And they actually sent me this for the purpose of review. So with that out of the way, we can finally take off this big outer sleeve that the box is in. And there we have this nice logo rendered in a nice little metallic, shiny stamping there. And it's not a bad size box. I do like boxes that are designed to be reusable, that have their own seal. It's not like the size of my Warhammer Dominion box, but it's definitely got a lot of space. Ooh, so here we are. We have our campaign and our fairly thick rule book in the nice pocketbook size that has become very popular. It's very nice to have these sorts of smaller rule books. Not only are they cheaper to print, but they take up less space on the table. Like I said, this is why a lot of the pocket-sized books that come in certain starter sets are so popular. We have a set of tokens for each player. That's one of the nice things about these sorts of starter sets. Oh, they are very, very delicately punched. They came out with just a little tap there. But one of the reasons two-player sets are so popular is that you can go in with a friend for the same thing. So both of you can have the same sorts of mats here. I assume these are things like hull damage and other assorted problems that can affect the game. Yeah, if you hit an opponent's ship hard enough, they will be subject to a mishap. Like they might have a big plume of fuel that shoves their boat forward, which can cause it to crash and all sorts of terrible things. And then we have here the sprues. So there's a, ooh, it's actually, whoa, goes all the way to the bottom of the box. And this is like a 3-inch deep box. So this is a lot of plastic in here. So we have, we of course have some of our bases. I plan on priming these in a nice ocean blue. We have a bunch of these. So we have here what I believe is, are these actually combined sprues? Because I think I'm seeing parts from various things. I think for the most part these are the Canadian Navy, but we get 1, 2, 3. We have a lot of these for the various airplanes, and we have this one, which I assume is for our Zeppelin, and the Zeppelin's actually pretty large. So we have 3 matching sprues here. Ah, there's the token that got punched out in transit because these are so delicately cut. We have flight stands. Here we go. Got a bunch of little flight stands. Have a pretty large. Let's set these here. See what we got. So we have our water bases. We have a lot of flight stands. We have some bases for the air tokens. Yeah, there's little air patrol tokens on these. They have the airplanes actually like printed directly onto the plastic, but they're like straight on the water. But these are air patrols. These are little things that your various carrier ships, and you're gonna have a few of those, can send out to sea. So we have, so it looks like we have 2 of each of the Imperium sprues and 3 each of the Crown sprues. And this actually makes sense to have sprues that carry a bunch of different units on them that you just recycle over and over again, because making these sorts of molds is a very expensive process. It's like a constant week of high fidelity cutting. These sorts of molds can easily cost you thousands of dollars, so it makes sense for you to make one type of sprue that you can just produce over and over and over and over again, because once you've paid for that mold, you can use that mold hundreds of thousands of times without issue. Each mold has a life expectancy of like bare minimum 100 things. So if you're looking into making models, making sure that you have one sprue that can repeat parts over and over again to make sure that you keep that going is a good way to do this. Of course, these days we also have things like 3D printing and COcast. Privateer Press seems to have moved to a 3D printing model, although I imagine they'll switch over to COcast any day now if they haven't already. So we have, and here's the measuring sprue. So we actually have a ruler that clips together that goes up to 8, 9. So I guess the idea is that it can curl around and give you even more measurement after you're done. That's kind of cool. And of course we have our angle, our turning measurement and our angle measurement. These are going to be a bit of a trick to cut out with how thick those are. Here we have more flight stands. So many gosh darn flight stands. I hope there's a way to order more of those replacements for those. We have some more Zeppelins. These are the smaller Zeppelins, so these are for the Prussian Navy. We have our submarines for the Crown, so we should have 3 copies of this one. Yep, we have 3 of those. So Another base, and here they are. Oh, this is going to be a big guy. These are the parts for the Zeppelin, and we get it across a pair of sprues. I guess the made in the UK, so it's very nice. A lot of people will notice that these sorts of war game pieces tend to be a bit on the expensive side. This box is 94 British pounds, which is, I think, about 110 US dollars these days. But it's nice that they're doing the manufacturing like outside of places where workforces tend to be fairly brutally exploited. So it's nice to do this. So they've actually managed to make it so you get the one blimp off of two identical sprues, and I have to say that is quite clever. And then we have our dice, and these I was worried about these. Looking at the pictures online, I thought these were also going to be painted, but nope, they are also molded dice. We have the critical dice and we have the hit dice. And again, if you want to grab a friend and split it, they have them in separate packs, so each of you can pick a naval force. We have some more bases, some more flight stands, because there's a lot of air power in this box. There's a lot of bases and flight stands. And yeah, like I said, it's a beautiful spread where we actually have the same number of sprues for each army, which I actually noticed just now are actually on these little like stilts. These little stilts that enable them to nest really nicely with the other sprues to keep everything nice and straight. I imagine these do wonders in the warehouse, and they also keep the sprues from like crashing into each other and warping each other. Very, very nice thing. Kind of wish we saw that in more games, but you can see it's clearly designed to be split between two players, and it's kind of perfect for that common tradition when it comes to wargaming where you're supposed to buy a set and split it with a buddy, except for one thing. It only comes with one set of measuring tools. Everything about this box screams, split me with a friend, except for this. And I honestly think it's a bit of a problem, because the measurement tools for this game are actually pretty unique. Particularly, like, the turning tool up here is something that I haven't really seen in any other game. So honestly, I think this set would be a whole lot better if they just threw in one more of these sprues to make sure that when you take one home and your friend takes the other army home, that both of you have some nice measuring tools. You can like do what a lot of people do with like their kill team measuring sticks, where they paint them up in the army colors and they do fun things like that. That's really the only place where I see this being a problem for a set that can be split both ways, because otherwise everything is kind of perfect with the two sets of dice, the two sets of bases, and the two equal numbers of sprue. Although in this case, Crown gets two different sprues at 3 each, and Imperium gets 3 different sprues at 2 each. And speaking of, let's get some of these together. And here we have the two fleets fully put together. We have here a grand total of 34 models, 4 escort tokens, and 9 short-range squadron tokens. This gets split between 21 units for the Canadian side and 13 for the Imperium side, with the large Stark Zeppelin making use of 4 additional escort tokens for a slightly better 17. Built the recommended way and using the Orbat codices, which are available for free online, the Imperium side has a 110-point deficit versus the Canadian army, but I think that's fair, you know? One army gets more to play with and a few more points, while the other gets the awesome centerpiece, in this case, the Stark Zeppelin, which acts as this box's Indrastra the Celestial Spear, and easily matches her in size, but without the effect of just tipping the points heavily in favor of the army who gets it. Though at 420 points fully kitted out, it still gobbles up a third of the army's points. It's also not hard to balance the armies point-wise. You can drop a model or two from some units to bring the armies closer together. Swapping 2 Orca submarines into becoming escort tokens for the Canadian cruisers seems to be the recommended way, bringing the armies within 6 points of each other. And honestly, this whole thing is a bit of a mixed bag. Some of the models are pretty simple, requiring just a couple of pieces formed together, but others are more difficult. The Canadian cruisers are quite the adventure with how they get cobbled together, but other models can be more on the oppressive side. The Canadian Aerial Squadron in particular has a lot of sprue bleeding onto the edges of the model, a manufacturing quirk to ensure the molds get fully filled, but this means that they must be planed down with a hobby knife to attach the pieces together, and it's very easy to overdo it. The Stark is quite the ordeal as well. The big central barrel doesn't have its own internal structure, so there's a big danger of it collapsing or buckling during assembly. These things combined means I sadly cannot recommend this set to inexperienced modelers. I don't know, maybe I've been spoiled by Games Workshop. The Rhino, for as silly as this old kit looks, is an absolute joy to assemble. The models themselves are also a bit daunting in that there is a large variety of ways to put them together, but not enough models to build one of each. Though this doesn't matter in the grand scheme if you don't subscribe too heavily to Wysiwyg. Wysiwyg, while sounding like a rejected Dr. Seuss character, is actually an acronym meaning what you see is what you get. Meaning that the way your model is assembled is what it's carrying in-game. For example, my Relic Terminators here are built the way I would usually use them. 3 classic Stormfist builds, one with a heavy flamer, and a Sergeant with a lightning claw to double up on those extra attacks. But what if I wanted to give my Sergeant a Power Fist to match up with the rest of the squad? This guy is already all glued together, so it's not like I can just swap out the arm whenever I want. Well, it turns out that Wysiwyg is more a guideline than an actual rule, as you have to clearly state and break down what your army is carrying at the start of a game, preferably written down. Wysiwyg is an immersion booster and time saver. If you plunk a unit on the table and say it's Wysiwyg, then everybody gets what's going on. So while there are other ways to build these models, I will be sticking with the versions recommended by the campaign guide, though some of these units do have interchangeable weapons which I might be able to magnetize. I do really wish that the Imperial cruisers came with an extra sled so I can prepare both versions of the ship without needing extra pieces though. Might be interesting to see this sort of modular build made from more traditional toy plastic for a different game. Also, the nose cones on the large Zeppelins have to be installed before the top piece. That trips somebody else up, so I figured I'd drop that detail here as well. However, it should be noted that despite the sheer number of ways they can be assembled, you must build the Canadian cruisers as a pair of Toronto class and one Halifax class, otherwise the Canadian fleet is without a flagship, and you cannot run a fleet without a flagship. But here, while I didn't have enough time to paint up the whole force, here's some quick and dirty paint-ups to help me talk about the rules. Dystopian Wars has everything you'd expect from a good naval combat game. With salvos and broadsides and boarding actions and air raids, you have surface, aerial, and submarine units with each having their own pros and cons, and a lot of unit designs that would be folly in the real world, such as combat zeppelins and iceberg boats. The game is played with alternating activation, where players take turns activating matching groups of models until they run out over the course of 5 rounds. It plays a bit different from a lot of miniature games you might be familiar with, particularly with how movement is handled. First of all, every vehicle has a mass rating. While this subject comes up in some rules, it mostly affects the drift of a unit. When a unit is activated, its members first drift forward a number of inches equal to its mass. This is to represent the vehicle's inertia and the natural movement of the sea and air, because come on, it's not like an airplane can just stop flying in midair. Literally the exception! But the idea is that these ships are big and lumbering, and collision due to mismanaged movement is a real danger. Each ship also has a speed and turn stat. Speed is how many inches forward a ship can travel, and its turn is how many times it can change its facing during that move using this universal turn template, with larger, heavier ships being less nimble than the smaller ones. Now, there are also rules for terrain in this game, but sadly the set itself doesn't include any. Well, no worries, I have some reasonable facsimiles. Another rule of mass is that a ship cannot shoot past a unit with the same or higher mass, meaning that your smaller ships can screen for your larger ones. The exception, of course, is airborne units, which this box is full of. Airborne units ignore screening cover in all of its forms, able to target anything in range, but unable to screen any units themselves. However, shooting up at them is harder as they are considered to be 10 inches further away for shooting actions, to a maximum of long range to units that are not also themselves airborne. Although the joke's on them, the Toronto's weapons are actually better at long range. Attacks are thankfully a bit simplified compared to other wargames. Rather than comparing power and toughness and all that, each attack gives you a pool of matching dice to roll. Other weapons and models in the unit can join in on the attack to increase this dice pool with matching weapons. For example, if my Toronto fires its rockets at the enemy Kriegstrom, it can add its second rocket weapon along with the 2 other rocket weapons on the other Toronto, taking the main 9 of the base weapons plus 4 more for each supporting rocket for a grand total of 21 dice. You roll this pool of dice and check for hits indicated by the red explosions. Each red explosion is 1 hit, each side with 2 explosions is worth 2 hits, and each explosion with an anchor in the middle is an exploding hit. Not only worth 2 hits, but letting you add an additional die to the dice pool which gets rolled immediately. And yes, exploding hits from this bonus pool can cause more dice to be added on, and so on, and so on. Wow. Each model in a unit also has defenses against specific aerial and submerged attacks, rolling this number of dice to fish up shield icons which nullify that number of hits. After this defense roll, count up what hits remain and compare it to the armor of the target. For each time you have a number of hits that matches this armor, you inflict a point of damage to its hull. If your hits exceeds the Citadel stat of the target, you've scored a direct hit. A unit with a massive 1 is immediately destroyed, while anything larger must roll a critical damage dice, which inflicts an additional effect, such as defenses shutting down, crews panicking, loss of vehicle control, or additional damage. These get marked with a status counter, which one can attempt to repair at the end of that ship's action, or at the end of the turn, and you want to do that, because if you take another direct hit and the same critical damage appears, the ship instead takes a catastrophic explosion, suffering even more damage and panicking the crew. In this case, the defense roll of the Kriegstrom spared it from both a 5th hit to its hull and a 3rd hit to its citadel from the monstrous 33 hits it had taken, but its armor was still breached 4 times, meaning it takes 4 damage. This is enough to deplete its hull points and change it to its weakened crippled status. The catastrophic explosion caused by the double navigation failures inflicted due to the 2 hits on the Citadel carries over to this crippled state, and the 2 damage the critical explosion causes reduces the crippled hull points to 0 and removing it from the map. There are other actions as well. If a ship gets close enough to an enemy ship, they can send the crew over on jetpacks to attempt a boarding action. Aircraft carriers send out their planes that buzz around their targets like flies, finally performing their attacks at the end of the round. The final twist, though, is the deck of Valor and Victory cards. These double-sided cards, drawn from a pair of matching decks, serve 3 purposes. Each card has a number which determines the initiative for the round, and they can be played in one of 2 ways. Either on their victory side, when certain conditions are met in order to gain bonus victory points, or on their valor side to gain a beneficial effect. Using one means sacrificing the other, which adds a tinge of depth to the mechanic. Still, I do wish these decks came with multiple card backs so the decks didn't get mixed together. So while the ships themselves might be clumsy to move and shoot, the exploding hits combined with the Valor and Victory cards makes things unpredictable enough that the game still requires risk-taking to succeed. There were some major changes to the game's rules to prevent alpha striking, that being fully eliminating a unit before it even gets the chance to do anything. I mean, what happened to the Kriegstrom is obviously a rather exceptional case, with a big chain of exploding hits and rolling doubles on the Citadel hits. That said, there's actually a treasure trove of information online, from the current version of the rulebook, the faction codices, and proxies for the Valor and Victory cards in multiple languages, as well as printout terrain, tokens, turning and blast templates, and even lists to use standard D6 dice. You really do only need the models themselves in order to play, no nickel and diming you like we see with other companies. Just needs a periodical to throw new campaigns at us, and we're golden. That said, I do wish it was a bit easier to get my hands on some of these individual components. Now, they do sell a Bits and Bobs box, which has all of the rules and dice and measuring tools and stuff, but I would like it if it were possible to order only a set of additional dice, or one Valor and Victory deck. Guys, trust me on this, swap the blue for black and the white for red and watch these alternate back decks fly off the shelves. But yeah, that's Dystopian Wars, an alternative history naval war game with a few familiar mechanics and some interesting new ones. It's another of what I'd call a back burner game, one with more of a cult following than a major presence, but still worth taking a look at. Thanks again to War Cradle Studios for sending me this preview set. And of course, big thanks to my patrons who helped make all of this possible, especially Spudmay, T Mayorga, and Cleeklo, who got the $10 and up levels. We'll be back with more cards in the near future, and feel free to join us on Patreon, with Discord access for as little as $1 per month. Until next time, this is Kohdok signing off. And for the credits, let's talk about how I did the flight stands. I primed them with Rust-Oleum Seaside Satin, and then used Citadel Azurman Blue Contrast to chill and texture it before dry brushing it in white. And if an amateur like me can get it looking this nice, imagine what an expert can do. Cheers!